I want to explain a little bit on the Industrial Revolution test question, short answer questions that you're going to have on the test. I want to do some background explanation review on these two particular questions. So I'm going to hide my fat head. What factors gave rise to socialism, and how does it differ from laissez-faire capitalism? In the Marx question, in a higher phase of communist society, only then can the narrow horizon of the bourgeoisie be fully left behind in society, inscribing its banners from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. So to quickly review, let's talk about socialism, and let's talk about the factors that gave rise to socialism and how it differs from laissez-faire capitalism. Remember, socialism versus capitalism. Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, proposing free markets, and the idea of profits, and driven by laissez-faire, or the invisible hand, no government interference, where socialism was that reaction to capitalist thoughts and focused on the general good of society. But to take it even more deeply than that, let's take a look at this idea of capitalism. Let's take it even more deeper, as a reaction to the ills of capitalism, because capitalism unregulated was a problem. With child labor, with women labor, with the immense, poor wages, the immense suffering. So the transition was very hard. Life was difficult living in these crowded slums, in these crowded tenements. They wanted a new kind of society, gradual changes with fewer hours, better benefits. Some people wanted moderate changes, and that's where the reforms came from. But capitalism was heartless and brutal. There was some that, like Robert Owen, believed that only way we could change society was through this idea of socialism, this radical solution of socialism. The people as a whole, rather than private individuals, own and operate the means of production: farms, factories, or otherwise other businesses. Robert Owen was a big proponent of socialism. He said the only way you could change society for the better, this idea of utopia. Sir Thomas More wrote about utopia, or a perfect place. He said some place in Scotland as a model village. Proved that employers could offer a decent living wage and still run a profitable business. These were socialist thoughts, again, to end poverty and injustice. This radical solution, socialism. The people as a whole run the means and factors of production: farms, factories, railways, and other businesses that would distribute the goods. So the transition, and it's a direct, as I told you, it's a direct reaction to capitalism, that direct reaction to the harshness of unregulated capitalism. But both are still acting out of self-interest. So again, let's look over here. And this is where you may want to stop things. What drives and gives rise to socialism? Income inequality and poor working conditions caused by industrialization and capitalism. Okay. Socialists, or people as a whole, own and operate the means of production, so as opposed to private ownership and that laissez-faire or unrestricted capitalism. Socialist governments, or the people, regulate production and distribution of goods, where laissez-faire capitalists believe in as little interference as possible. So governments or the people, and socialists believe that the governments of the people, and you could say believe that government or the people should regulate production and distribution of goods. Where laissez-faire capitalists believe, hey, let the entrepreneurs, let the business class take care of this, and the system will work out just fine if that is to happen. So socialism, what happens, remember, is those reforms are really what ends up being the result. Socialism really doesn't necessarily take hold, but the result is the reforms with child labor, with education, that we talked about in class already. That's the major result. A more extreme form of socialism was this idea of Marx, of our friend Karl Marx. And I'm going to put this up here with Karl Marx. He is the German philosopher condemning the ideas of utopia or socialism as unrealistic idealism. It's just, this really isn't going to work. Engels was the guy who wrote Friedrich Engels, who wrote about the pollution and other things, pollution in the cities, and so on. And they wrote this pamphlet, the Communist Manifesto. Now, Engels kind of gets buried in the background, and Marx ends up being the person that really emerges here as the main thinker, as the main philosopher. Communism is a little bit even to the left of socialism. It's that the inevitable struggle between the social classes, that I already talked about this, will lead to the creation of a classless society where all the means of production would be owned by the community, a classless society. He theorized that economics was the driving force. There was a history of class struggles between the haves and the have-nots. The haves were always the ones who owned the means of production. In this case, he called them the bourgeoisie, the business-owning class, the entrepreneurs, and the middle class, the managers. The have-nots were the working class, or what he called the proletariat. The proletariat. So, according to Marx, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat were always at odds with one another. They're always pitted against each other. So the workers would take control of the means of production. In the end, the proletariat would be triumphant, he ultimately theorized. The workers need to stand up, take control in a classless communist society. And it would mark the end of the struggles that they had endured throughout history. Or, in this case, he sees this as coming to like a boil, basically. He sees these struggles as coming to a boil for him. All these struggles are coming to a head with this situation with unfettered capitalism. He sees them as coming to a coming to a boil, or because he really, and again, what really drives him is that he hates capitalism. He believes it's creating a prosperity for a few, and everybody else is getting screwed. So an international struggle to bring about example. Everybody across the country needs to unite. Workers of the world, unite. Okay? So, and again, why didn't his ideas really take hold? Well, eventually, living wages start to get a little better. Workers could buy more. They gained the right to vote and correct problems in society, and they would remain loyal to their nation as opposed to workers. The closest we get to communism is the creation of the Soviet Union under Lenin, who was a big follower of Marx. But ultimately, the problem was is that they were bourgeoisie themselves because they were the government. Marx didn't necessarily envision government being the answer to controlling the means of production, but ultimately that's what it ended up being in the Soviet Union, and ultimately that's why it failed. But the ideas do lead to some reforms. So let's look at again the idea of Marx. So again, this is where you might want to pause. Marx explaining how the economics will work after they become communists. Here's his quote. In a higher phase of communist society, only then can the narrow horizon of the bourgeoisie be fully left behind, the rich business-owning class, and society scribing its banners from each according to his ability, each according to his needs. So in other words, each according to what he could do and how he could contribute to society. How will these economies work after they become communist? The proletariat will become triumphant, right? The proletariat will become triumphant, and this should be in a much better font. The proletariat will become triumphant. Workers take control of the means of production and set up this classless communist society. Ownership of resources will be controlled by everybody and equally shared, a community of people. The quote is saying that people will receive these resources according to their need for them, not according to their ability to earn wages, not according to their ability to pay, but their ability to just according to their need. They'll contribute based on their ability to do so. A true classless society, not the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, but a true classless society. Each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And this is the true highest phase of communist society. This is the true ideal in communist society that we never reach.